as I work through the recording starting. Okay, thank you for your patience there. Delegate Byron, I got you. Delegate Leftwich, are you joining us online?
Sure.
I'm here.
That,
Delegate Leftwich, if you can unmute and let us know you're attending virtually.
I'm here.
I'll circle back around. I see your, let me make sure our speakers are on. I see you.
sorry. Got a new electronic budgeting system.
Delegate Leftwich, do you mind unmuting yourself again so we can make sure we have our speakers on in person?
Part, it went well without, any real issues. But it's just as a reminder, this budgeting system
I'm
is
here.
designed to make the budget preparation easier. And for
Is there an
the
DHCD
have an easier financial
contact
audit.
itself to talk, make sure we have our speakers live here?
We're also going to use a budgeting system because we.
Yeah, I can hear you, Chandler. This is Casey, but you got a lot of background conversation going on.
Yeah, there's a budget discussion, some sort of budget tool discussion going
Switch over
on.
our speakers. Delegate Wright. Delegate Reed.
Delegate Reed is present.
Excellent. We've got our speakers working now here. Thanks for patience, everybody online and in person. Senator Boysko. Senator Hashmi. Senator Lewis, are you with us? Senator Lewis. Steve Sandy. Ray Lemuro.
Here.
Casey Logan.
Here.
Casey, thanks, Casey. Rich Schulman. Here. Jimmy Carr. Here. Mike Cole.
Here.
Thanks, Mike. Chrissy Proctor.
Here.
Secretary Laura, Representative.
Beth Green.
Beth Green. And Secretary Merrick or Representative online.
Here. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Madam Chair, we've got a quorum present.
Okay. I want to welcome everyone. Just say that those of you that don't know, this is an election year. So you might see that it's going to be difficult as we have certain dates that come on our calendar, like a primary coming up and another. Somebody probably knows the hours, minutes, everything, but June the 20th, I certainly don't have to worry about that right now. So, but there are other people that need to make sure that they are out knocking on doors before that day comes so they can be there next year. So we're sorry they couldn't be with us, but we've got a lot to go through. So the first thing on the agenda is the approval of the January 20th minutes. Got a motion to approve those, or anyone want to make any changes?
Move approval. I'll second.
Second.
And that's been seconded. Any further discussion on the minutes? All in favor, say aye.
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 Online,
Aye.
okay, those are approved by unanimous consent. Okay, moving on. We are going to get an update from the Office of Broadband. So Tamara, if you would please enlighten us.
Sure, and so good morning, everyone. Just to give a few office updates. One, I'd like to have my staff stand. I think it's the first time we probably have all of us in the same place, so if you all could please stand. All right, and so I just want to recognize the team, and so I'd also like to introduce a new members that have joined us since our last Broadband Advisory Council meeting. You guys can sit down. James Illicet. James, can you raise your hand? James comes on board as our new telecommunication project manager, working on the body program. And Cameron Lewis just came on board as our digital opportunity coordinator. And then I also want to welcome Aaron Barnes back. Aaron, was serving our country for a year in Qatar, and so I want to thank Aaron for his service, and Aaron just joined us back, in office in May. All right, so with that, I'll just. And so with that, I'd like to, turn the rest of the pre-updates over to our team. Caroline Leptoy, who recently was promoted as the Virginia Telecommunication Project Manager, will be doing the body update. And then we'll go into Chandler doing an update on the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act broadband program. That's a mouthful read. And then at that point, we will have a work session regarding the state digital opportunity plan. And with that, I'll turn it over to Caroline. And do you want me up there? You. Okay. Come. We got a lot more to say.
Not a lot, just a quick update. I apologize. More rapid.
Don't have to do with the smoke or anything.
Yeah. So, if y'all, I hope everybody can hear me again. Sorry, I found this way. Like Tamara said, for anyone who I haven't met, I'm Caroline Woodsoy. I'm the program manager for the VATI program at the Office of Broadband. As I'm sure everyone saw last month, Governor Youngkin announced the 2023 VATI Awards. So I'm just going to give a little overview of those awards and a brief update on VATI in general. So as a recap, for our 2023 awards, we received 35 applications requesting over $300 million in grant funding. We awarded 14 projects, and that includes one letter of intent, which I'll speak to in a moment. So overall, that's a total of $59.5 million in state general funding, and that's to serve 29,400 homes, businesses, and CAIs. With these awards, we'll be reaching over 20 localities in the Commonwealth. And that includes 5 new folks to our program, and I'll highlight those on our next slide. And we will be leveraging more than $118.6 million in local and private sector match funds. So here's a look at our 23 award winners. Our new folks include Essex, Irving, Dr. Fields, Winrico, and Orange. You'll notice that our the West Piedmont PDC actually was a sector grant, including the letter of intent. So the purpose of this letter of intent is because this project is the phase 2 of a current phase 1 project. And at the time that these decisions were being made, that project was not currently under construction. So the decision was made just to ensure that phase 1 is active and under construction and progressing before a contract is executed for phase 2. So VATI awards to date.
Back to that a minute, you want questions while you're doing it? I just have a quick question of understanding that with the awards. So does each one of those indicate an application or more than one application? And I was just, so that's one question. What would that be?
So each one of these were separate applications.
Okay, and then how many, just to try and understand, how many applications did you receive? So we know how many didn't get funded.
So we received 35 applications total in the award team.
Were the others just not acceptable or some of them aren't ready?
So for the most part, again, this year we had 50 million as opposed to our previous year that had all of the federal funds infused. So we had lots of great applications. It's just, you know, they didn't quite meet the scoring, a high enough score to receive the funding. Chandler, I don't know if you have anything else from that.
Yeah, I mean, there was,
Yeah.
there were good applications submitted this cycle. It's not like we only had $60 million of grid projects. There were 100 to 150 million dollars of good requests that we had in the queue. Ready to fund. We've had debrief conversations with those applicants and shared that it's just a matter of funding availability, not giving us a good project to fund.
Okay, thank you.
So, Batty awards to date, overall, our program has allocated over $935 million in state and federal funding. And that's to over 388,000 locations in 80 cities and counties across the Commonwealth. And we're leveraging, including the 23 awards, we will leverage $1.1 billion in matching funds from localities. So here's a little look at all Batty awards since the beginning of the program, so 2017 to 2023. It's a little difficult to see, but prior to the 21 awards, we were not requesting shape files. So the localities that are fully highlighted were fully highlighted simply because we didn't have those specific shape files for it. The more shaded areas are more specific because we have shape files. But that's the overall look at the spread of our Batty awards. So in regards to current Batty awards, we have reached over 50,000 locations amongst our 21 and 22 awards as of today of 23. The end goal here for both of those funding years is 350 locations. So 50,000 down and on our way to the 307. We're working to reduce the barriers to construction. We're having conversations with workforce development organizations, and we currently have a partnership with the Virginia 811 program to streamline the utility locating process. And this is the purpose of this is to give the utilities enough advance notice and let them know that these projects are coming to the area so that they can have the crews in place to perform the locate. There are no other questions about hand it
I
over.
have another question. So you have locations there. Are we doing locations and households or?
So that's, when I say locations, I mean it's either a household, a business, or a. So in Batty, we usually call it passing, so we, what they have the service in the day. So just.
And then your take rate, running about it.
We're on average about 60%, which is about twice the national average for rural communities. And so we've stayed about between 60 and 65% average across all projects to date.
Does this cover the tobacco commission awards too, or no?
No, it does not. There are very few of the projects that are currently in our portfolio even have tobacco money as matching. There may be two. One in Dinwiddie County, they had the tobacco commission. I forgot what year they stopped. Investing in more residential projects. I want to say maybe 2018, there was an agreement that Body would be the primary source of funds, and if they were not successful through Body, the tobacco localities could go to tobacco for funding. And so there's been a few of that.
Because of my understanding, the tobacco commission generated a lot of the cooperative monies that are hitting some of the rural areas too.
Yes, they did.
Anything online?
Any questions from online?
No, thank you.
For the folks online, recognize there's a significant delay in the network from advancing the slides in person to advancing the slides actually on Microsoft Teams. We'll work through that. And if there's a significant delay, we'll stop screen sharing and re-screen share to catch up, make sure there's less of a lag time. But if not, then these slides will be made available after the meeting. And feel free to stop us and ask questions as we go along. I think that'll allow the slides to catch up as we're going through the presentation. How ironic to have internet speed problems at broadband.
We need to get some fiber over there, Chandler.
All right, good morning, everybody. I'm Paul McAndrew. I'm gonna go over broadband equity access. I'm gonna do a high level overview and then pass it off to Chandler. Gonna go over our initial proposal volume. So the BEAD program, Infrastructure Investment Jobs Act program, at the federal level, that allocated $42.5 billion in broadband expansion nationwide. The intent of the program is to the broadband deployment of jobs in their states. For Virginia, because we put over $935 million into the body program, federal and state funds, to over 388,000 locations in 80 cities. The BEAD program is a significant opportunity for us to not only finish the infrastructure deployment job, but move on to potential affordability and adoption programs. All right. So some background of the BEAD program, as I said, it's Infrastructure Investment Jobs Act program, $42.5 billion, distributed through a formula allocation based on the number of unserved, underserved locations in each state in the United States. The purpose of the program is to help the United States, states and territories to end the infrastructure disparity and then start to look at digital opportunity, digital literacy programs, such as affordability and adoption considerations. For Virginia, it's a great opportunity for us to continue the investments from the BIDE program, finish allocating funds to the broadband deployment, and start to explore affordability adoption programs. So to date, we've held 4 listening sessions with local governments, tribal governments, providers, and nonprofit community organizations. But I lost for a second. Okay. The feedback from these listening sessions is going to inform the development of original proposal and 5-year plan, which I'll get to in a minute. Those are critical milestones, planning stage of the BEAD program. We are continuing to work with NTIA, National Telecommunications Commission Association, that administers the BEAD program, to make sure that the BEAD planning documents are submitted ahead of schedule, and on time, and have a streamlined review from NTIA and the state. Okay. So BEAD funding, as I said, is based on a formula allocation based on the number of unserved and underserved locations in each state and territory. Each state does receive a minimum allocation of $100 million from the BEAD program. And then the formula allocation takes place after that $100 million. The NTIA has targeted June 30th to make location announcements program based on the FCC's national broadband map. The locations in the FCC map don't match Virginia mapping data, like the Commonwealth actually. So the high level, the stages of the planning perspective. First, the 5-year plan. This is similar to the Commonwealth plan that's been done in the last few years. This plan is the intent of it is to look at how the BEAD program, in alignment with the programs under the Digital Equity Act, will be rolled out in the Commonwealth, and then how alignment will occur between the BEAD program and the Virginia Digital Opportunity Plan. After the 5-year plan, work on the initial proposal, which is with some additional details, is sort of like the body guidelines. It's a policy document that explains how the state is run by the state, how the competitive process will unfold. and then how Virginia will manage the budget deployment. The final proposal is the next step to add on to the initial proposal with more details on how all funds, including what's any fund potentially left over from deployment, be used in Virginia or the program. Also, feel free to stop me if
So who does all this?
The Office of Broadband staff. And we do have some a consultant that is helping us as well.
Then how long do you have to do that?
And so the team will go over the timeline, but, the deadlines from NTIA, I want to say the 5-year plan. So we do have some planning funds. Governor Youngkin allocated the planning funds to us last year. And we talked about that at the last meeting. And so the 5-year plan is officially due to them in August, and the team will share with you when we plan on submitting that. And our initial proposal is due then to everyone's initial proposal across the country is due December this year. And then the final proposal is a year after the approval of your initial proposal. And that all depends on the federal government. And so I will still co-sponsor and I'll let him kind of share with you. And I've talked about the initial proposal. It's due December 30th. And so, well, if you want to go over, that's kind of what our schedule is.
Yeah, so this is the time we have the BEAD program as established by NTIA. So it doesn't necessarily mean that it's exactly the timeline as a going full, but this is the minimum. So I want to establish by NTIA. So you can see I won't go one by one here, but the NOCO released last year, general letter of intent, criteria planning funds. Our 5-year action plan is due within 270 days. But we received those initial planning funds. I think for us, it's August, late August. And then, as I said, the funding allocation, which is going to be this pretty significant big announcement from the federal government on June 30th. And that's going to be when states are actually going to find out their allocation amounts for the program. Because right now, we don't know. And then an initial proposal is due after these notice of available amounts released by NTIA. And then we begin the challenge process. 20% of these funds, 20% of your total allocation will be released. At that time, the initial proposal is approved by NTIA. I think once you submit your final proposal, which is I believe a year after your initial proposal is approved, the final proposal is the remaining funds in the program. That's when you can really start to roll out the program. So here I'll just go over, this is the federally established mandated priorities of how the funding needs to be released in order of priority from the federal government. For Virginia, it might not be as consequential because, again, of the progress that's been made under the body program. You see the little graphic there at the bottom, or note there at the bottom that unserved, underserved locations, community anchor institutions, they can all be rolled into one project area. So we don't necessarily have to first look towards unserved areas, then, after only considering unserved, underserved. For Virginia, because of the progress in the body, we can consider our applications for unserved, underserved community anchor institutions simultaneously while also supporting workforce development programs. And then following allocation of funds for deployment, we can start to consider affordability adoption programs that fall under this, what NTIA calls non-deployment. So anything eligible under the program, but not specifically broadband deployment. And here I'll just go over, before I hand off to Chandler, just a few of our office's guiding principles as we go through the BEAD program. First, to obligate funding to every unserved and underserved location in Virginia. Take as many elements of the body program that have made body service accessible and implement those in the BEAD program wherever possible. Third, just to maintain the momentum through the body by accelerating as much of the BEAD milestones as possibly can. The 5-year plan and the initial proposal, which is one about this the other day. And then finally, just to conduct much stakeholder input, which we started with our listening sessions and we'll continue with our volume 1 input session, but to continue that stakeholder engagement throughout the bidding process well into the non-reporting institution. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Chandler to discuss the volume 1. You're gonna have to. Oh yeah, right.
Good with everybody. Chandler Vaughn. I work with Tamara, Cole, and Caroline in the broadband office. Excited to talk about volume one of the initial proposal, just to give an idea of what that is, and why we're consulting BAC on it is under the BEAD process, like Cole said, there's 3 key documents. It's a 5-year plan, initial proposal, and final proposal. The initial proposal is what most closely resembles what the traditional body guidelines and criteria are. We've always come to the Broadband Advisory Council in the past by budget language and by code to consult you guys on the definition of unserved and therefore the body guidelines. We want to follow a similar process under this and get your input on volume one of the initial proposal, which is one of 2 volumes, and I'll explain what's coming next in volume 2 on the next few slides. The 4 sections under volume 1. This is mostly standardized from the National Telecommunication and Information Association. That's the federal agency and department that's administering the BEAD program. But the 4 key things under volume 1 are identifying the existing funding streams already at work in the Commonwealth, what's been deployed using state and federal funding, what will be deployed using state and federal funding. Because BEAD cannot be used to overbuild those locations that already have a forceful commitment to service. So there's sometimes some concern about, well, why are you guys thinking about BEAD in terms of the realm of unserved locations in Virginia when you've already constructed, like Caroline mentioned, to have 307,000 under construction in the last 2 award cycles in 21 and 22. Well, the BEAD program isn't purposed, and we're not allowed by statute, and quite frankly, we're not interested in doubly investing in unserved locations as an office. So I want to make that clear from the start and talk further, but that's the first important step of the BEAD initial proposal, is to identify existing funding streams. Secondly is identifying served and underserved locations. Just to make a quick note on definitions here, our definitions in Virginia are not the same as the ones in the federal program. Governor Youngkin in his first body guidelines process, along with the Broadband Advisory Council, upgraded the definition of unserved in Virginia from 25/3 speeds to 100/20 speeds. The federal definition for broadband still has unserved at 25/3, but 2 tiers it. So it establishes a definition of underserved at 100/20. Functionally, it's the same thing. We'll be able to reach the same areas under BEAD as we would under the body program, but under the federal definition, it's 2 different tiers. We're to prioritize unserved areas first and then go to underserved, but those projects can be deployed in conjunction with each other. Thirdly, identifying community anchor institutions. And I'm talking too much on the slide already, so I'm going to defer to the one I've got later on about CAIs to go over the definition of that. And the BEAD challenge process, which is the most important, in my opinion, part of this initial proposal, volume 1. It'll take the most stakeholder communication, most work with you guys to make sure we've got the right realm of eligible locations to deliver BEAD funding to for broadband. This slide we're not going to go into, but it's the language of the specific requirements as listed in what's called the Notice of Funding Opportunity, or the NOFO, particular enunciation on the end there, to list out what the requirements of that volume 1 are. So feel free to read this. We'll also cover it on our input session Monday afternoon of volume 1 for our stakeholders, besides the Broadband Advisory Council.
Chairman.
Yes.
Question right away at the end.
No, go ahead.
So I know in the past, we have access to the DSL data. We have historically used VGen, which is a much better and useful state level database. Can you talk about mapping those to one another? I mean, how do we make the VGen database swap to what the federal data says is right? I mean, that's been a real concern for us, and probably, that's why a lot of their data was wrong.
And we've got some preliminary analysis. I don't know if you want to kind of share what we've been able to come up with Virginia Tech and kind of what we're planning on doing moving forward.
Right. And to add on to what Tamara is saying too, there's 2 key steps. The first, we're not going to overbuild areas that we've already built out or in the queue for funding and for construction. We've got to link those VGen points to FCC fabric points. It'll be an iterative process with folks involved to make sure that we're looking at the right realm of transferring from VGen over to FCC fabric. It'll also be something that's put out in the challenge process for us to talk about later on. So folks can study the areas of unserved and underserved locations we put out initially for the challenge process to make sure that your version of what you believe are the eligible realm of locations of your body projects aren't duplicated in what we say are unserved under BEAD.
So you guys are going to try to map the existing funded body locations that are based on a DGen data set to the federal data set before it comes
So
out.
they just gave us access to the fabric, and so Virginia Tech has access to that, and so they're in the process, as Chairman said, it'll be an iterative process to map the fabric IDs to the VGen locations, which will be a fairly daunting task.
It's a part, not a science.
Right.
Yeah.
And then, but that'll be crowdsourced based, so we'll have the opportunity to, okay, that makes sense.
And so they're working, we just got access to the fabric, I want to say about a week ago. And so they're actually, Virginia Tech is working on that now. And so first we had to get permission to actually map the fabric, which was something that took a very long process from cost for us.
So considering the components of volume one in context of what's coming in volume two, the heavier component of the two is going to be the second volume that's coming out. We are in the process of drafting that. It'll be a separate public comment process. I'll explain why we're putting it into two volumes on the second slide, but here are the components of it. It's long-term objectives in the state under the BEAD program. It gets into more of the heavy program guidelines criteria. So how are we going to score applications? How are we going to value applications? What's the most we'll pay for a location in terms of state dollars for a fiber solution, which, as Cole said, is established under the BEAD program as the preferred technology type. It also has some federal priorities infused into the volume two. So you'll see on there climate resiliency, strong labor practices. Those are components that are passed down in guidance by NCIA that we have to consider when drafting our volume two, the initial proposal. So you'll see some new things in here that aren't considered in the current state general fund body guidelines that we'll be bringing folks along with and informing of in volume two, the initial proposal. So the reason for two volumes, this is something that's been recommended by NCIA and it's an avenue to see in the NOFO to accelerate implementation of BEAD funding in a state. So to look at it in two distinct volumes, the challenge process, that of determining the eligible locations under BEAD, can be conducted independently of setting scoring criteria of applications. That allows us, as we push out volume one for public comment, get your comments back on that, make final edits, we'll submit that to NCIA. Once we submit that, they'll start considering it. We don't know the timeline of that consideration, but we're following their model, so we hope it's quick. And we'll be able to start that challenge process upon approval of volume one and submission of volume two. That allows us to start the challenge process while NCIA is considering our rules and guidelines under volume two, which effectively celebrates the award timeline for BEAD. I know that was a lot of steps there, so stop me if you have any questions. So that's how we're thinking about these two volumes and why it's beneficial for us as a state that wants to keep the momentum going for the BEAD program. Cold time, yeah. Okay, we're a deeper dive into the sections of the initial proposal. I'll breeze through the ones I covered more in depth earlier. Section one, inventory existing funding sources. This is state and federal funding. You'll see a few of those examples listed up here on the page, like Byron mentioned earlier, tobacco commission funding is also at play here. The important thing here is understanding where the investments are, what investments have been made historically. So BEAD dollars are not used to overbuild those existing and to be constructed investments. That's step one. We've got that list of inventory funding sources on our website in the draft initial proposal document.
And Chandler, to explain, so what we've done in terms of the tobacco commission, because as I said earlier, there are some projects that have actually not been constructed through tobacco. And so a lot of the early investments through tobacco commission, if they didn't get to 100/20, those areas actually would be considered unserved. And so we're working with tobacco staff to get where they made investments, kind of like bodies. We made an report to a locality. We didn't have specific location data. Tobacco did not have that data as well. And so we're working to collect that information from the providers for the early tobacco investment. So we are still working in partnership with them.
Madam Chair, this is Ray.
Yes, go ahead, Ray.
I know that the Virginia Resource Authority has also been used for building broadband as well. Should they not be included in this list?
We should include them to the extent that they've got projects in the field with defined locations that BEAD should not be able to supplement.
Very good.
So the Connect America Fund, some of those are ones that had applications that were extended way out, right? Because I remember looking at some of the rural ones that were 8 years down the road. What are you doing? What are you doing with those? Are you still like, identifying those and giving them their time? I mean,
So with that, because that is a FCC administered program, I'm just gonna make an assumption that the FCC was also building this map should account for the investments they've made before they issue the unserved location. But we can look into that because they administer both all of the auctions, the CAF 1, the CAF 2, everything that's federal minus, the E money. So we will check into that. They should have that information from the providers who provide reports to them. But I know you all have worked previously with those programs.
That sounds right to me.
Okay,
Yeah.
so the federal government should be accounting for their investments prior to issuing the map.
and I'm sure there's a lot of varied programs. What concerns me, some of the ones I saw, they're the most risky
Yes,
programs. So if anyone has dropped out or drops out later, then those areas are kind of left in the dark.
and so that's one of the concerns that actually have come up from a lot of state program officers. And so one of the things, just so you know, we had RDOF has come up a lot because RDOF is the newest auction program. It's forbidden completely within the NOFA. We cannot even consider our RDOF area like we did in the state program. And so that what I'm saying is there's a larger conversation because all states have a problem with the auctions. They have 6 years to build. Some of them are defaulting within the first 3 years. It appears that the federal government's not considering that. We've had a conversation that if there's a default on record, so a provider writes a letter to the FCC, they admit that they are not keeping up with the timeline that was approved by the FCC. There's a huge gap there. So the providers are saying they are behind in their obligations to FCC. I don't know the penalties. I might look to y'all. Peanuts. And so the question is, will we be allowed to go into those areas? We don't know the answer at this point. And so that is a question that we're waiting for the FCC and NTIA to provide an answer on. But everyone is concerned regarding the organizations that are not good actors, not delivering the service as obligated from the federal resources.
Since they're putting a priority on it, I would like, with all this funding, I would like to think that they would put the same priority on those ones that are not getting completed. But who knows?
But the largest RDOF winner who is not going to be building in Virginia was SpaceX.
Right, and they're
Which of those locations.
and those locations were picked up by body.
Yes, and there could be more of that problem, but like the biggest potential problem that states face, Virginia is gonna have less of a problem with because the biggest RDOF winner in the state has been their long-term application has been denied, and the feds are already recognizing that and showing those locations as eligible for someone else.
And we picked up a lot of those because the previous administration declared satellite as not being broadband, and so they were already up for grabs in the last round of audit.
Okay.
Good points, good
Yeah.
questions.
And so we'll continue to pose that question to the federal government regarding the existing auctions and the lack of fulfillment of obligations by ISPs.
So to get into section 2 and section 3 on one slide, we've covered this a bit previously. Section 2 of the volume 1 is publishing a list of unserved and underserved locations as determined by the FCC map in their most recent May 30th release. That May 30th release reflects December 30th, 2022 coverage for broadband providers. So this will be the realm of unserved and underserved locations as proposing in the volume 1 public comment. This will be the list of unserved locations we can put out for folks to determine if an area has service already or is unserved when it's claimed to be served in that list of locations. But I'm going to talk more about that in the challenge process slide. Section 3 is something that's a newer process to our office, and that involves defining and identifying where community anchor institutions are. So think rural rescue squads, rural libraries, even in urban areas too, right? I mean, this is not just an unserved community anchor institution list. This should be a community anchor institution list that reflects the entirety of those locations across the Commonwealth. So we'll be putting out a list of community anchors as a part of this challenge process that then we really need help with pushing this out information to get the community anchors that aren't listed in that list on it. community anchors are defined as we're proposing in the definition at the bottom of that page, and I won't go through reading it, but it's an intentionally broad definition that we're putting in on the to get input back from folks on. So I'd encourage folks, again, I don't want it to be an oversight because we haven't done this in the past. It's an important process, and I want folks to hone in on what that definition is and make sure that list is as accurate as possible. Because under the BEAD program, community anchor institutions are eligible for deployment funding if they don't have a gigabit symmetrical broadband access. So that's why this is an important part of what we're doing here. It's also going to be important for digital opportunity work that we'll talk about next with folks from Guy House. Section 4 of the challenge process is the challenge process. I've got a few slides on this one. Most of the information on this one has already been covered. The key takeaway, though, is that this BEAD challenge process is substantially different than that of the state general fund process for body. We're going to walk through these proposed challenge process guidelines. Just so folks know, we're all on the same page. This is the model that was published by NTIA for their public comment period. They're still in active consideration of comment they're receiving on that challenge process guidance. The comments we receive on this guidance, we carry forward onto the model that NTIA publishes as their final model that will adopt as many components of and match public comments for our challenge process. So going on to the next slide, this highlights the major differences between BEAD challenge and body challenge. Most importantly, the BEAD challenge process, because BEAD is not going to be multiple rounds of funding, happens at the start, where we define the complete universe of unserved and underserved locations in Virginia before we put out locations for ISPs to submit proposals on. As you guys know, under the body program, we invite applications to be submitted, and then those application areas are published. Then they go through a challenge process, but this happens on the front end of BEAD. Challenges under BEAD can go in either direction. So as I was saying earlier, the unserved and underserved data is as of December 30th. So a lot of networks have been built out since December 30th of 2022. Those folks will have the opportunity to challenge and say more locations are in fact served on our list of unserved and underserved locations. Folks that believe locations are unserved will also have the opportunity to challenge those as well. Challenges have to be submitted at the location level with fabric ID points, but we're going to give folks a chance to submit bulk challenge. We don't want the administrative nightmare of having folks submit a Google form for every single location they believe can either served or unserved in this process. So rest assured there'll be a CSV file with bulk upload Tech to administer this process as they've done with our service territory data collection process. And one key component of BEAD too, this is the last bullet, is the transparency aspect. Right? The body program has always been forthcoming in terms of posting body applications online. We have not historically posted the challenges. I mean, they've always been subject to public records requests. But we haven't historically posted the challenges as well as the outcomes, the rebuttals of body challenge process. Under BEAD, per their transparency plan published in their draft guidance, those challenges, as well as the rebuttals and the outcome, is all public information that we as a broadband office would publish periodically for folks to review the outcome of those challenges.
What's the personally identifiable information if individual locations are not permitted to make challenges? Right, because I think in the volume 1 that's printed, an individual homeowner would not be permitted to challenge and say, I'm not served.
Right. And the eligible challengers under BEAD are ISPs, local governments, and community institutions. So you're right. I mean, hopefully they're not naming individual customers in their challenge, but what they might do is pull up a bill from a customer and submit that as evidence as a part of the challenge, which would have their name, address, last 4 digits of their credit card number. We've got to scrub that before it goes out. So to talk about the starting point, and over the last 5 years, you've heard the broadband office, the previous administration, the current administration talk about the inaccuracy of federal broadband maps. We're basing our starting point of our challenge process off the new national broadband map, which is location-based and not generalities at a census block level displaying coverage. The office has put in a lot of work to make sure that this national broadband map is as accurate as possible. And I don't want to grandstand on the work we've done, but it is important making sure that BEAD is as accurate as possible. It's not an exercise of saying gotcha to ISPs. It's an exercise of making sure that their coverage data is as honed in as possible. Specifically in the example of the line extension program. If somebody's going to be charged a couple grand or even potentially more than that to have a line extension run to their house, we want to make sure that service territory data is accurately displayed in the broadband app so that those locations are eligible for BEAD and we can get that location broadband access. So to go by the numbers, we submitted 1.9 million challenges to service assertions. The service assertion is one claim by one ISP at one location. It could be multiple challenges at each location, or that's why the number there is so high. Over 400,000 of those challenges have been sustained, where the broadband provider, after a conversation with us, before a conversation with us, has agreed that yes, in fact, I can't actually serve this location. I'm going to concede this challenge. There's 400,000 of those. The key number here, this is what we learned on May 30th from NTIA, is that between version 1 and version 2 of the National Broadband Map, almost 80,000 additional unserved locations were identified. That's the key number here, to make sure that we're going to be able to deliver broadband access to 80,000 more locations than what we would have under version 1 of the FCC map, thanks to the work that folks in the office and partnership with Virginia Tech have done over the last 6 months, which is a huge deal. In totality, and again, this includes numbers, a lot of numbers and a lot of locations that are already in existing funding sources. Caroline said earlier, over 300,000 locations are included in 21 or 22 body awards. But the totality of the unserved and underserved in Virginia, 381,812 lack unserved, this is locations, not people, lack 25/3 broadband access. 61,365 locations have 25 free speeds, but they don't have 100/20 speeds. So they're functionally unserved as per ARP's program guideline, and we'll be able to get to those under the program as well. But again, I want to reiterate, a lot of those are existing funding areas that we're not going to overbill in BEAD dollars. I'll quickly breeze through these 2 last slides. There's 4 stages, which you'll see are similar to the body state general fund challenge process. We publish the eligible locations, just like we publish application areas. We have 30 days of the challenge process, 30 calendar days. In this proposed guidance, we'll notify broadband providers on a rolling basis of challenges that are received in that 30 days, not all at the end like we have under body. They'll have 15 business days from the time that they're notified to submit rebuttal information. Then we've got 30 calendar days for the broadband office to make those determinations on a rolling basis. Per the proposed guidance that's incorporated for the initial proposal. I won't get into these. These are the criteria that folks can submit a challenge under. There are a lot. I encourage people to go to the volume 1 of the initial proposal to read through them. It's more things than just claiming a location is in fact served by proving the network availability is there. An example, folks can submit a challenge on the basis of a location having over 100 milliseconds of latency at that home, business, or community anchor institution. So it gets into the technical details. Thankfully, the guidance from the federal government also identifies what's an acceptable rebuttal from a broadband provider in that realm. So we've got guardrails to operate in. You don't have to consider a wide range of information. We've got specific requirements for rebuttal information that has to be submitted by ISPs, as well as specific documentation that has to be submitted in each one of the challenges to be able to find the ISP that area is in question. I know that was a lot of information. There's a couple of yawns out there while I was going through it. I appreciate the comment. Questions, comments?
Quick comment. I think it's important to share, and Chandler, thank you, Nicole, for doing a great job. While we made significant investment in the Commonwealth, and we know based on what the team just shared, our allocation is based on the FCC map. And so the blessing and the curse is that because these investments are currently under construction, it does not impact our allocation for BEAD. And so while the map says there's about 400,000 plus locations that are unserved or underserved, it does not take into account where we have investments. And so we will get our fair share of funding through BEAD. the other important thing, as Chandler said, an additional 80,000 locations that were deemed as served were flipped to be unserved. We've done some math on the back of a napkin, and so that's hundreds of millions of dollars that will come to the Commonwealth that originally would not come into the Commonwealth. And so I just want to thank the team for doing a great job. Virginia Tech has been a great partner in helping us, and so that's why they're going to continue to help us with navigating the new federal rules around the challenge process. And so I just want to give the team kudos because between November 18th, I think it was, we were actually at the Governor's Housing Conference when the first map came out, through May 30th, the team has worked tirelessly to make sure that the Commonwealth gets their fair share of the BEAD funding. I also want to thank our ISP partners, many are in the room, who had conversations with us about the data they submitted, and also fought the good fight to make sure the Commonwealth gets their fair share of the money. So I just want to commend the team because without the great work of our team, I will tell you, he didn't say it, but of the 1.9 million challenges we submitted, the FCC only accepted 4 million nationally. And so that means that we beat a lot of other states who were trying to fight the good fight for their states that lost the fight. And so I just want to commend the team because without this team, I had no idea how we would have gotten the work done to make sure we're going to get our fair share of money. That also, and it's a great pivot to the next conversation, that also allows us to look at how do we address adoption and affordability because we'll have potential additional funding to address those needs in the Commonwealth. So it's not just about getting infrastructure access to communities, but also making sure folks know why they should sign up for service, how to utilize the service, and if there are needs around service access, we can address those with this additional funding. And so
We'll know the dollar amount, right?
yeah, we'll know the dollar amount June 30th.
Yeah, but I wouldn't bury the lead. I mean, but 70,000 additional locations means that relative to other states, because of the work of the broadband office, Virginia is probably going to get another 80 to 100 million dollars.
Yeah, I can say that number. You can.
So like, that's a BFD. I mean, that's higher than that. Chandler says. Oh,
That's the napkin.
I mean, that's a whole lot of money that's more challenging. By our broadband office should result in Virginia getting relative to other states. So it's a very significant effort, and I think Virginia nationally was a leader in doing this.
Right. Yes. And we haven't talked about it, but we still have, our last part of the biennium budget that allows us to still stay agnostic while the BEAD funding focuses on fiber. We can still work with our communities on identifying the technology that best serves their residents based on the crazy terrain that is the Commonwealth. And so I just wanted to thank the team for the great work that they've done. There's not a person in the office that has not been involved in all the work we're doing. So thank you.
Is there anybody online that has any questions?
Council members online, feel free to unmute yourself, ask questions.
Yeah,
This is Steve Sandy. Can you hear me?
Yeah, let's go with Steve first. I think there are two people talking.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, I want to echo the comments about the hard work from the staff to make sure we get our fair share of the BEAD funding. I truly appreciate that, and I know how much work went into that. I did have a question relative to this program and then also the proposed schedule for Body 2024. If maybe the staff could speak to what the anticipated schedule of the Body program. I assume we'll still have another round of that coming forward in addition to the BEAD potential funding options as well.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. I appreciate the question. It's one we've gotten from a lot of folks. Just a quick note about funding availability for the FY24 round. The General Assembly and Governor did allocate $50 million each year to biennium for Body. That letter of intent that was issued would borrow against the FY24 Body allocation. So functionally, we're talking about $42 million available if that letter of intent is fact awarded into a project. As far as timeline goes, our thinking behind this is we're trying to synchronize the timelines so folks have the opportunity to comment on initial proposals relating to and the Body guidelines at the same time. Very roughly speaking, I think, and I'm going to look to Tamara for concurrence on this one. I think we can comfortably say July-ish on the public comment period of those two documents, volume 2 of the initial proposal and the Body guidelines for FY24. Tamara, do you want to speak to anticipated edits, if any, on 24 guidance?
Yeah, and so we aren't anticipating making significant edits to the current body guidelines, other than, one, we gotta make sure the applications are not due on a Saturday. And so, because we worked really hard on the last set of guidelines, and we've heard from stakeholders that this seems to be the most seamless round of body, and so we don't anticipate making any additional changes unless we get significant public comment back. And so the goal, as Chandler said earlier, is to run the public comment for volume 2 of the initial proposal. At the same time, we run the actual body guidelines for the program. And so around July would be the timeline for both. And so folks would comment on both. You would see the BEAD proposed guidelines, and you would see the state body guidelines at the same time, Steve. And so with that, of course, the BEAD timeline in terms of the actual process for applications are dependent on the approval by NTIA, but the goal is to keep the train on the track and keep our momentum with the state investments with the state generally.
And Steve, to add on what Tamara was saying too, I think there's a benefit to stakeholders being able to study and comment on both of the guidelines at the same time. Because instead of in the past having that one window to apply for state general fund dollars, it'll functionally feel like 2 application processes. Now, only ISPs can be the applicant to BEAD. We're working on scoring criteria to make sure that local coordination and local approval has to be granted before an ISP could be successful or competitive under the BEAD program. But for an ISP, at least at minimum, it's going to feel like applying to 2 separate grant programs. And I think the best way to make decisions about which funding source to go after, and I hope folks will choose to submit an application to vote, can be best made when both public comment periods are running at the same time.
So what does that imply about the timeline for applications, in addition to not being on a Saturday or this year's fading round?
Yeah, well,
September, October.
Right, and so just thinking through the process out loud, if we're 5 months behind schedule of what we thought we were going to be making awards for this past round of body, I think you can see we can catch up a little bit, right? But I think push the regular body dates back 2 or 3 months, and there's your time.
I think there was 2 questions you said. Was there
One.
something else?
Mike Cole.
Mike, feel free to go ahead and
Echoing the comments and congratulations for being the best in the nation as far as the challenge process. You guys did an outstanding job. I want to follow up a little bit on both Steve Sandy's and Jimmy's comments. The timing is important for us, for people who will be applying, as well as whether or not the system that is in place, the portal, are we comfortable that the portal, whatever we use for both application processes, will be able to support the number of applications that will be coming in? So that's one of the questions I'd like to make sure we're thinking about as we go through this. So it's similar to what's been going on, but we need to understand how body and the BEAD application will work, and will it be the same system?
Yes, so Mike, the CAM system, which we use for applications and administering grants, administers billions of dollars in grants for the agency overall. Every single grant program DHCD runs through the CAM system. And so we're confident that CAMs can handle the additional amount of applications that will come in through BEAD and body. The other thing is, folks had questions about, so ISPs are eligible as users in CAMs. That is reflected in the line extension program. And so that was one of the things we were able to overcome, because ISPs don't typically necessarily do an audit. And so we have at least almost 20 providers who are now officially utilizing our application system for ECAP. And so we feel confident we can pivot that to accept applications for BEAD. And so CAMs will be the on record application system for our program.
and like to add on a little bit to that as well. The BEAD program is different, and Cole mentioned this as well. The volume of applications will be significantly greater because under the BEAD program, we are accepting, and as determined by the federal guidance, come down to us, we have to accept multiple applications for the same location or same collection of locations in any given county or region. So instead of having a body state general fund model of one provider comes in for one set of locations with no overlap between proposals, there will be under BEAD.
And just so you know, to give you a kind of bird's eye view into the challenge process, Virginia Tech is building that portal. Unlike previous rounds where folks email their information and actually go into a portal and we'll be able to do real-time analysis for challenges and rebuttals. And so that will change for the upcoming round. I don't know, yeah.
I think just to balance expectations here, right? Some of these processes will seem like, right? We want to maintain the body framework because there's a handful of counties, more than a handful of counties that still don't have an active body project. It's universally being built out in their locality. We want the state general fund portal or body to feel the same, and look the same. Those localities have to be successful. Maybe they'll be successful on their beat, but if not, they've still got the same framework, right? Body. Yeah.
And then I think it'll, as Shelley said earlier, folks submit for both. If ISP submits for BEAD and the ISP partners with the localities to submit for body, that decision will be made. But it's easier to peel back the federal rules from someone coming in for body versus trying to take a body application for state only. And add all the, as you saw the laundry list of requirements, it's easier for us to go, okay, thank you for doing all this work for BEAD, but state money seems like it might be more feasible and we can peel back all those climate resiliency planning and labor standards. Okay, let's move on.
Mary, do you want to introduce that?
Sure. All right, and with us. this
Chandler.
Morning. Oh, there's a question.
Oh, we had a question
Yeah,
online?
Yeah, Chandler, this is Casey. I want to go back 1 second to, we talked a little bit about maybe additional funding coming through BEAD for, I don't know, I think not good actors with the FCC and RDOF funding. Do we know any timeline where those locations might be coming back to be included in BEAD funding if they make a decision to do so?
So I didn't say there's additional money. The question is will those areas be eligible for funding? Once the funding allocation comes out June 30th, we will not get additional funding from NTIA. But we do know that through the challenge process, Casey, there may be some flipping of locations from unserved to served or served to unserved. But it does not change whatever our base allocation will be from NTIA. And so to Delegate Byron's question earlier, what if these providers who have the options don't deliver? What is going to be the outcome from the federal government? We don't have an answer to that question, but the question has been posed to both FCC and NTIA because we already know some folks are defaulting on the new auction programs, let alone the ones that are still being built out. And so I don't have an answer, but I do know whatever number comes out June 30th, the Commonwealth is living with it. And so provide comments. They're open right now and they're open again in July for volume 2. And any comments you all provide that relates to the specificity of the guidelines, include that, because that's a concern. You want to add on?
I'm sorry, there's blanks with question to answer your question. The idea here is, what is the definition of a default?
Yes.
It, as defined in footnote 52 of the NOFO,
Which Chandler knows by heart.
which footnote, the question is a default not meeting a milestone of a federally awarded auction? Or is a default fully defaulting and no longer being able to build out that area that was awarded in the federal auction? We don't have the answer to that. When we know, we'll tell you.
Thank you, guys.
So I think we're now ready for the guidance.
Yes.
Delegates.
Yep, right. Okay, so at this point, I'll bring up our consultant with Guidehouse, our consultants with Guidehouse. They have been brought on to help the state develop our state digital opportunity plan and also work with our community action agencies who are developing these plans. So with that, I'll let the team introduce themselves and move forward.
Madam Chair, my name is Christiana Gergic, and I'm the director with Guidehouse's state and local government team. I'm here with my colleague Beth Rader Johnson. So this next section is on digital opportunity, and we have a mini agenda within an agenda to take you through. So first, just some brief introductions to who we are. Then we wanted to provide you with a little bit of background on the 3 digital equity grants, as well as the requirements. There's a whole separate NOFO to the BEAD one. we wanted to introduce you to. Thirdly, our approach to help the Commonwealth and the Broadband Office meet those requirements. And then finally, some preliminary insights. Our work won't be done until October, but we wanted to at least share some sort of initial insights with you today. And then finally, we have some discussion questions right at the end. We'd love to just open up the floor for some insights and sort of general discussion. So first, just in case you're wondering who the heck we are, Guidehouse is a consulting firm that's headquartered in Virginia. We're supporting a number of states and localities with their broadband planning. And for this work in particular, we've partnered with the Southern Institute of Research to help with some of the survey elements, as well as the community engagement. And we were awarded this work by a competitive tender in April. So as I mentioned, we just wanted to, before we get into the detail, really thought it would be helpful to start with this overview of the Digital Equity Act, which is one of the sort of many constituent programs of the IHA. So I know that Virginia is already a leader on the deployment side of the equation. In terms of the digital opportunity side of the equation, the NTIA has defined this as three things on the left side of this slide. Firstly, access, skills, and devices. And under access, they've also included this sense of affordability. So after you've actually hooked up the location, can the people in that house sort of use the internet effectively? Do they have the skills and can they afford it? And in order to achieve these sort of aims of digital opportunity, the Digital Equity Act actually includes 3 grants. We've listed them here on the right-hand side of the slide. Right now, this work is supported by the planning grant. That was $60 million in total. In order to unlock the capacity grant, which is $1.44 billion. Now that $1.44 billion, what sort of things might it be used for? Well, things like digital literacy training, small business support, digital navigator programs, device lending, et cetera, et cetera. We don't actually have the official guidance for the capacity grant program, but we can sort of guess about the types of programs that states might want to use this for. And whilst this program is really dwarfed by the BEAD program that you just heard about in terms of funding, there are a few sort of guesstimates and crude estimates about what it might mean for the Commonwealth in terms of the scale of funding. The rough estimates that are out there are around sort of 30 million. If you couple that together with, again, crude estimates, I'll emphasize them very crude, for the BEAD program, maybe around 1.2 to 1.4 billion for BEAD, you know, you're looking at doubling the size of your existing program. That's not chump change. So, you know, the ability to double what you've already done is a really sizable opportunity.
I have a question. Does the, who determines what the funds are to be used for? Is that going to be federally driven, or do the states have a say in that money is used?
The states, and so that's part of the work that the consultant is helping us do, collect. And though I don't want to steal y'all's thunder, but we're going through an iterative process of how do we determine the Commonwealth's priorities and potentials for programs. Talking to our stakeholders, and there are many different ways we'll be doing.
So this will require a bill?
We don't know if it will require a bill, but we'll look into that.
Yeah, and I'll come on to it in a second. There's sort of a lot of boxes to take for the NTIA to release the funding, but in terms of what you spend the money on, like what sort of mix of programs, that's at the state's discretion. And again, you know, you just heard a lot about the BEAD program, which is sort of the grayed out portion of the bottom of this slide. The DEA and BEAD are meant to work together, right? So they're supposed to be pulling in the same direction. The two plans should really dovetail, you know, deployment working together hand in hand, which leads to these wider digital opportunity programs. The timelines don't quite sync up, but they are roughly aligned. And digital equity has a similar 30-day public comment period. At the minute, we're aiming for around August, and then submission to the NTIA around October. Those deadlines might shift a little bit, but that's roughly what we're aiming for at the minute. And then there would be a 5-year implementation period, so the timing over which to do those programs and sort of spend the funding from around 2025 over 5 years. So in order to actually release the funding to the states, the plan has to meet a number of requirements. There's actually 15 in total. I didn't bother to list all 15 on the slide, but just to give you a flavor of the types of things that we're helping the broadband office to do. These are the orange boxes. So the opportunity plan that we're helping to draft needs to have a vision for digital opportunity for the Commonwealth. It needs to have a needs assessment for covered populations, and we'll get into what those are in a second. It needs to have an asset inventory. And in the context of digital opportunity, the asset inventory has a little bit different meaning than it does in the BEAD context. BEAD is all about the infrastructure, right? Digital opportunity is more about kind of what kind of programs and strategies might your areas have for lending out devices already. What are nonprofits and community organizations doing? So here, assets has a much sort of softer definition than just like physical assets. And the idea is to be able to leverage what's already happening in the Commonwealth and further and enhance that with this additional funding. The additional sort of things on here are the actual implementation strategy, and also noting any barriers faced by the covered population. This terminology of covered populations is very important in the context of the plan and in the context of the Digital Equity Act. There are 8 of them that have been defined by Congress. They're listed here at the bottom of the slide, but just to name a few that are very important in the Commonwealth, at least in terms of sort of proportions, rural inhabitants, low-income individuals, aging individuals as defined by 60 plus, and individuals with a language barrier or low literacy. So that was it for my very quick tour of the Digital Equity Act and sort of high level of grants. I'll now hand over to my colleague Bev just to take you through our approach to helping the broadband office meet all of those requirements and where we're at with that.
Thanks, Christiana. Good morning again. I'm Bev Jackson, manager of Guidance and teaming with the DHCD Office team for here. So our approach, and as Christiana had shared, the work in of itself, the digital opportunity plan, and what you see here is the beginning part of it. We're early on in the findings. So what we would love to have for you is an opportunity to share some of the findings, the stakeholder telling us. I can take you through a piece of that as we flow through, but we want to step through the work basis. And so what we've done is we've identified kind of key critical aspects of how do we get the digital opportunity plan developed and what that needs to look like. So the first of which is the statewide survey. On May 26th, the survey went out from the digital opportunity box. It went out broadly. We are hearing from stakeholders, particularly the community action agencies, that they received the survey, and we're getting some inputs as to kind of feeling about the survey. The survey itself will be out for 6 weeks. Our intentionality, of course, is for the survey to close at the end of June. But we're also mindful of respondent rates and the like, and also our targeting timeline as well. So the intentionality 6 weeks. And at present, it went out on the 26th, and we're hopeful. And as the survey results are coming in, we have our constant conversations about the meta analysis, what are we seeing? Also, the distribution plan, the channels of communication. Where are we seeing real respondent rate? Where are we seeing high respondents? What does that need to look like in terms of how we channel our energy to get that up? The stakeholder mapping. Part of this process was an intentional review of the Commonwealth. What are communities looking like? What are localities looking like as it relates to digital barriers to assets? What does that need to look like? So we teamed with, of course, our DHCD partners around the stakeholder mapping and our community action agencies too, in terms of really carving out what the stakeholder map might need to look. And then we have our outreach strategy. The key component of how to move forward relative to that setup and planning component is to make sure that we're targeting the right areas. So, Guidance has helped to support with the development of an outreach strategy to include what the qualitative and quantitative aspects, what does our method really need to look like to hear from stakeholders. I'll move forward and talk you through the types of methodology, whether it's focus groups, stakeholder interviews, community input sessions, and we'll talk you through the quantities of those as well. So let me pivot next to research and outreach. So our researchers collected the data, again, 6 weeks. We will be doing meta-analysis throughout. We'll also conduct interviews. Our interviews are primarily targeted for our stakeholder conversations. These are one-on-ones. Ideally about 30 minutes where we hear from the community. What are your gaps? What are the strengths? What are your resources, the barriers of it like? So we can infuse that ultimately into the digital opportunity plan. Leading practices. So a key component of really understanding this work is the leading practices aspect. What are other entities doing? What are some best practices? What are some promising approaches here that we can use into what we fold into an implementation that is we move forward with the digital opportunity and then soliciting community input. Again, throughout this continuum, you'll hear us reiterating the community input, talking whether it's a focus group, whether it's a stakeholder interview, who's the survey, what are we hearing? Once we mine all that information, then the synthesis aspect. What are the barriers, opportunities, and again, those are the key questions, right? We analyze the data, we provide our findings, and then there's the need assessment that Christiana has spoken to an asset inventory. All of the data that we're getting, whether it's qualitative in scope, whether it's quantitative in scope, we're really infusing into this synthesis. It will ultimately take us to our final report. From our project timeline, aims, of course, or that focus window. We are very cognizant of that October window in terms of product submission. But what we so seek is to have a report that's in draft in August and for review period. The administration will review it in addition to our DHCD partners. We are well aware of the public comment period as well. And that will round out the 4 phases for our digital opportunity plan, the development. Now, addition to the approach, wanted to get a little more granular for you around the stakeholder conversation needs. So there's the statewide survey, and we mentioned that it went out on the 26th of May. And the primary objective of that is really to capture representation, but also the perspectives. Again, what are the assets for the barriers that you're saying? Pivoting to the one-on-one conversations, this is a masterful list, right, of stakeholders throughout the Commonwealth, whether we're talking about government state agencies, whether we're talking about communities. We want to make sure that we solidly understand within this conversation how relations are impacted. Again, making sure we stay within the parameters that are associated with digital opportunity plan. Community input sessions. And we've already begun our initial conversations with the community input, the community action agencies. What we call this were pre-planning conversations. And these were 30-minute conversations where we heard from and we truly listened to the community action agencies to just hear what they were feeling about the digital opportunity. We'll pivot those next into larger, more thorough conversations that are what we're calling our community input sessions. We're on task to have 8 community input sessions at present. Additionally, we have our focus groups. So we are in the process of fully quantifying across the continuum what the stakeholder outreach will look like. But we know that we tend to have at least 5 focus groups, between 4 and 5 focus groups, where we're going to talk to local experts, truly get a perspective about the regional nature of digital opportunity and what that looks like. And then from our approach, we pivoted into preliminary analysis and visual analytics are always quite helpful. And so what we wanted to share with you is just a bit of the preliminary analysis of what the NTIA data provides, specifically as it relates to covered populations. A lot of our conversations intentionally when we're talking with our community action agencies or we're talking with stakeholders is around covered populations questions, specifically as it relates to digital opportunity. The maps before you here, they really provide the percent population of what we're below 130% of the federal poverty level. So, this visual analytics and geospatial conversation here gives us an idea, at least on the outset, of what we are so seeking to accomplish with bridging the digital. Additionally, what we have found in terms of our recap and research is that, the passage of IIJA really helped us to define relations, specifically as well as proportionality. And again, we close out the slide just stepping you through some definitions in terms of the high-level definitions for where are our populations, where they're covered and where they exist within the community. And specifically, as we think about that, we just want to keep in mind that regions that are specifically identified by particular gaps, but also covered populations that are part of those particular groups where we help to better understand their needs. And again, all this information will get pulled into the digital opportunity. Any questions for our approach, our methodology, if the qualitative or quantitative components like right back to the same case.
Yeah, your last slide you mentioned about engagement. Go back one. We welcome your perspective on how to best generate enthusiastic engagement across the department. That's always a challenge for any group, including government. It's like you mentioned the word government and they all run. So what type of response are you getting and how are you, getting people to get engaged? Are you finding success with that or, we recognize that it can be a struggle, so.
I'll kind of weigh in. And so Delia Byron, when we first were receiving the planning money from NCIA last year, we had a conversation. And so one of the things, because there's a defined population that has to be targeted for the investments and the engagement, we partner with our community action agencies who are really boots on the ground in a lot of our communities, providing Head Start programs, Smart Beginnings, Meals on Wheels. And so instead of us coming in as the government, we came in as the government going, here's some money, community action agencies. We want to partner with you because you are in your communities every single day working with these populations. And so while it's us creating a financial resource, we're really leveraging our relationship with the community action agencies to be the excitement and help with the engagement of folks within their respective communities. And we've got nine regions coming across the state, but hitting every single community action agency within those regions. And so while we've got 9 grants, we've got all of them partnering with community action agencies all the way from Northern Virginia down over to the Eastern Shore, down to the coal fields. And so we've got coverage with these organizations that are really working with these people every single day. And so that's how we kind of couch the excitement. A lot of other states are using their colleges and universities, but for us, it was important for us to really work with communities, with representatives that are boots on the ground. And ironically, some of the folks who we've learned through the community action agency partnerships, some of their employees, I remember during COVID, nonprofits were saying our workers can't be remote workers because they don't have internet in their homes. So even some of the folks that work for the community action agencies have experienced not having access in their respective homes and their communities. And Christy talked a lot about her family not having access and having to go to Starbucks and McDonald's. McDonald's. Oh, it's small Starbucks. Our little people to be able to do their schoolwork. And so it was important for us to not come in with a top-down approach, but really a bottoms-up approach. And we feel like the community action agencies provide that bottoms-up approach.
And are those groups including the government? Are you getting the local government?
Yes, and so part of their requirements with each of the grant awards are for them to engage with their local representatives as well. Their governments, their schools, their library systems. I can't tell you how many times, there's a Cindy Church from the Library of Virginia. Every time we bring this up, she's like, wait a minute, don't forget the libraries. And so we're making sure that they have every single representative within their regions at the table as well. And if they don't, we make sure that they're there.
We would also love everyone's
Yes.
in this room was the survey. If you have newsletters to constituents, employees, colleagues, anyone that can fill in that survey, the more responses, the more representative, the better the team. Yeah.
Yeah, we have pushed out to Banco, VML, and the Virginia Association of
Questions out, questions, yes.
And a press release a press release was issued yesterday.
It's actually our last slide. I'll say, no place has completely solved this puzzle, right? Like it's just a big kind of societal journey that we're all on together. But part of this project is to look across other places and states and communities and cities and try and get some bright spots of insights and examples that we can provide back to the Commonwealth, hopefully draw on some of these interesting examples that we're seeing elsewhere. So we've just pulled together, again, this is a bit preliminary, but just some 4 examples that we thought were interesting just to get the juices kind of flowing a little bit for this group. I'll go through them one by one. So the first one there you see is the state of Colorado. And their equivalent of the Broadband Advisory Council set up a subcommittee on digital literacy. For them, they found from their data that was a particularly important sort of barrier for their population. And so they set up that subcommittee, and they've got working groups now on policy, data, and leading practices and how they're going to sort of solve that issue. Next is the city of Philadelphia. So through their federal funding, their CARES funding, they've actually given some of that to Temple University, and Temple University now has set up this specialized training program for small businesses to get onto e-commerce platforms. So they train them in things like cybersecurity, web development, and digital literacy, and help entrepreneurs get into that e-commerce sort of ecosystem. The next one we have is North Carolina. Their broadband office has partnered with the state university to really provide what they call these rapid mini grants. And these are pretty small, and a lot of them go through nonprofits to provide devices. Because a lot of this affordability of devices is really hard. The national affordability a program helps up to a point. That often wasn't far enough facilities that have very quick application process through the nonprofits, and that helps push out devices to critical covered populations in the state. And last but not least, the city of Boston has set up a $1 million annual city fund. And again, that is put out through a nonprofit. And that nonprofit provides both digital literacy training to individuals as well as small businesses on digital skills. It provides device lending. It actually has hotspots and it's not other devices that they lend out so people can get access to these things and do it consultation. So that was it in terms of our formal presentation. We have a few kind of thought bubbles here on the slide, and we'd love any sort of thoughts from this group about the needs of Virginians that you're seeing across the state, and how, if we were able to solve those, what sort of benefits we would see. And I think we already touched on this, but any sort of views on how you might, sort of the information you might like to see from us in the future as we start to develop this plan and any other systems we look at to offer to the economy.
And just to kind of put a point on this work and establish how important it is, we talked a lot earlier about the BEAD funding allocation. To the extent that we are able to reach unserved areas under BEAD, we're really confident we'll have dollar amounts left over after finishing the job on deployment, which is our priority first, and also the requirement of the BEAD program. We could be talking hundreds of millions of dollars to make smart investments in digital opportunity. That's why this work is so important. So we're hearing what the needs are for the communities and the state around broadband affordability, adoption, digital literacy, that we can design programs as a broadband office in conjunction with the General Assembly, like Delegate Breyer was saying, so that we're building on the work we've done in rural communities to get them infrastructure by helping them understand how to use that service, but also making progress in more urban areas, which the body program hasn't gotten to because they're historically served, to make sure that we're addressing the entirety of the digital divide after broadband access, then focusing on affordability and adoption. So I wanted to help make that a little more clear before we started the discussion, because this is really important work that's going to have funding attached to it for implementation through the Federal Digital Equity Act, but also we would expect under the BEAD program once the job for deployment is done.
And how much was that funding going to be?
We'll know on June 30th, it's total dollars.
I ventured some guesses where others could.
Yeah, I kind of want those numbers.
Yeah, there's
They keep me up at night.
Just left over after. Plus.
All right.
the estimates by journalists have ranged from hundreds of millions to $1 billion plus.
Senator Porter, stop saying the number you said last year.
So we're not only looking forward to primaries, but now we're looking forward to June 30th, right?
Yes. I think June 30th. Yeah, but yeah, that's true.
But yeah, with that, I think we can turn it back over to the guidance folks. I think we want to get input from you all for this plan to be informed as well.
And the input doesn't just have to be today too. You all we can circle back and also talk to you all as we're going through the planning process, which as I said earlier, will be right now currently through August. Yeah.
Question.
And I was gonna say, I would expect that you'll share with us some of you really didn't share everything you're getting or anything really, in great detail.
We'll circle back with an update on the number.
So, maybe we need another work session if you want our input, unless you're just looking for written comments.
Right.
Well, we've got to come back to you guys with body guidelines in the July-ish timeframe that you outlined earlier.
July,
So I think,
next month.
I know,
yeah, so it's a
we're like August.
couple.
You have a question online?
We've got, Mike, you asked your question, and you typed it out in the chat. Do you mind, reading it for us so everybody in the room is also informed?
Thanks, Chandler. Yeah, it seems to me that there's significant digital opportunity needs throughout the Commonwealth, whether it's in the rural or the urban areas. Just the digital training and access to modern and advanced devices, whether those are 3D printers or VR anything like that. It's definitely something that we could do much better at, providing those devices to a longer base. People who can't afford them today may benefit by finding jobs that help them get out of the poverty need. So it's definitely something that should be worked on. But looking at all this, I think one of the final report that will come out of Guidehouse, there should be some sort of recognition that the BAC plays a big role in the next phase of what's going on with the Commonwealth as far as adoption and affordability goes. And I'm just wondering if people are thinking that there should be some sort of legislation that changes the BAC's charter to focus more. I mean, we've done a great job bringing accessibility to the Commonwealth. The next step is to make sure people are able to use the systems that we're bringing forward. So I'm suggesting we look at changing the BAC's charter. Big suggestion, just wondering if the way to do that is in the digital opportunity report. And I'll leave it there. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for all the hard work on this. Appreciate it.
This is Christy talking in case you can't hear me, Mike. I appreciate your comments about potentially changing the charter, but as someone who still lives in an unserved area, we still don't have, broadband or any type of connection out in my neck of the woods, and I'm not the only one that feels that way. I think that there would be a lot of folks in the community who may be concerned over changing what our mission is when there are so many of us who still do not even have internet. So until that day comes, I think that there would be serious concerns about changing the trajectory from a rural perspective.
I would expect that would be a big discussion at the General Assembly too. Focus is gonna want to stay on our original mission, and if anything, I was wondering how to complement it. We have other areas too, like we have JCOTS, we have other places too. I don't want to distract from what we're doing. They certainly go hand in hand, but the reason I think we've made so much progress is because we've dedicated the funds and we've made sure that we've kept on track with making sure people get connected. If you can't connect it, you can't do any of those things. So, and then like we just recently did a realignment of workforce after 30 years, and I'm not proposing it's going to take 30 years, but we start to have all these silos everywhere of people trying to address this issue. And then if you don't bring all that in, you've got another problem. So it's a lot to be discussed as we go through all of this.
And to your point, Delegate Byron, right now there is digital opportunity work being done in different components of government. And we've heard from the Department of Education that they have a grant program. And so part of the asset inventory of the work that Guidehouse is doing with our office is to find out who all out there, even with the state government, is doing that. Library of Virginia, Department of Education, there's a host of different folks. I mean, just like the workforce development, we've got to, as you Chandler talked about that earlier, we're trying to figure out how do we make sure we have the fiber technicians and wireless technicians in operation and locate all the things we're identifying as gaps in the workforce to not only build the broadband, but also maintain it. And so you're right. And so we, as part of their work, they are talking to all entities within the state, especially state government, because we operate, as reflected in the workforce development effort, operate in silos as well. So we are pulling that information in as well, because it may be that the funding comes to us and the programs live where they currently live, or we figure out a more streamlined process so that folks don't have to apply to so many different types of programs moving forward.
Is an eligible use of this, so I'm gonna call it the process and adoption of money, whatever left over after you've built everybody. Yeah. And maybe we're getting ahead of ourselves, but to me, a priority for that money, it's one thing to, give someone one device one time, but it's another thing to kind of build capacity and ongoing understanding. And like, to me, two major areas that would be telehealth and precision agriculture. And as a use of this money to build capacity in those areas, like, okay.
Yes, and so one of the things with the planning funds, the BEAD planning funds, which actually has a 5-year shelf life. And so the goal of, once we maybe do the initial proposal and the 2 phases, and as we work toward the final proposal, to start looking at those specific uses around telehealth, smart farming, The other thing that's come up recently, which we did not know was a unintended consequence, folks that are hard of hearing as we build out broadband. The equipment right now is meant for copper phone lines and not meant for voice over internet. And so we've talked to that specific state agency about piloting, what is the new technology out there? Because we have an entire population in body project areas that are no longer going to have phone service through copper phone lines, but will have it through the internet. And so the technology is a little behind in that. And so we're looking at partnering with them. Yes, go ahead.
Just to your point, I think that's like, exactly you were talking about, was the sustainability of the programs. That's like one of the great things about our model of delegating the actual planning work to the community action agencies. And then we have another grant program that I want to make sure we don't forget. It's our case study pilot program, which sort of similar to the North Carolina example the Guidehouse team mentioned. We're making these smaller grants in the range of $10,000 each to organizations that we've identified in Virginia that are already doing digital opportunity work. For example, one group that's looking for a grant is doing has a smart health program, a telehealth program down in Southwest Virginia region. Another is a rural county library system that's hiring digital navigators to go out and help people who are just been connected to broadband through a body project. Actually, they're going in, they're helping them set up, smart devices, learn how to use the internet, things like that. Things like smaller programs that identify sustainable solutions, and then also the community action agencies are tasked with developing implementation plans in the regional plan. So they have to come up with strategies to address the divide in their own region, so that we're not just broad strokes, state solutions. The community action agencies are going to go to their communities, to these community input sessions, identify what the problems are, come up with potential solutions. So then we'll have a whole array already well before we get to potential need non-deployment. The Virginia Digital Opportunity Plan will already hopefully have identified a lot of these potential sustainable solutions, because sustainability is, or I would say, probably our #1 priority with these programs.
And we don't have a smart ag one, so Christy, I'm gonna lean on you to find a potential pilot that we can provide some capital.
Deputy Secretary Green, we can talk about that as well.
$10,000.
Yeah. That's important.
Okay, do we have any other questions?
Yeah, we have Casey Logan. Casey, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, guys, I just want to maybe throw this out here with looking at what we can do for the digital equity side of things. Maybe just a suggestion of holding something for the state of Virginia with, I don't know, it'd be local counties, local communities, or it just could be to DHCD itself and your contacts on reaching out to really engage, especially the rural areas, on what they feel like is the best way to approach this in their specific communities. We've all seen who's deployed broadband in some of the more rural aspects. The take rates aren't quite what we would expect them to be, just based off the fact of it seems like this is an education and a opportunity to educate for some of these households of what broadband can do for them. So just a thought, didn't know, maybe to pulling them all together in some kind of conference or summit might be a good idea to answer some of these questions that are up on the slide.
Yes, and actually that brings us to the next thing, and we were going to talk about that at the next BAC. With the BEAD money, we have received $5 million in planning money, and so we're going to subgrant 3.2 million. And if you all remember, I think I talked about it at our last meeting, but we're going to fund local community broadband affordability and adoption plans. And so 3.2 of that 5 million, I think we targeted 100+ localities on a rolling basis will be eligible to your point, Casey, to apply for funding to develop actual community plans that'll be specific. And the timing will be later this summer, because one, we just got the most recent batting round out the door. And so the goal is for communities who are currently going through body to be able to start to develop their own local plan, especially the ones that have benefited from the body programs. And so to your point, Casey, there will be funding available. It's up to $50,000 per locality to develop their own plan. And so that will open, we're hoping the month of August. We got to go through some hurdles with NCIA for the funding, but that program will be open. And so there will be customized plans for each locality And it's on a rolling basis, so it's gonna be a program that's not just a one application cycle. Because this work doesn't happen in a grant cycle.
Thank you very much for your presentation.
Here's our digital literacy test, QR code link.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay. Do we have any public comments? Anyone online?
We do have one individual sign up, Mr. Bob Nichols, D&G. Madam Chair, we didn't specify a time for public comment. 3 minutes?
Yeah, 3 minutes, okay, great. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you guys. My name is Bob Nichols. I'm the CEO of Declaration Networks. We're an ISP headquartered in Virginia. Got our start on the Eastern Shore in Accomack and Northampton counties. And we are now in 7 other states. I wanted to.
What's your name? What was your name again?
Bob Nichols.
And with who?
Declaration Networks.
Declaration, okay.
Yeah, and the reason I'm here today is I wanted to see if I can look to this council, perhaps the broadband team as well, to help me with some inhibitors that we've had in our markets in Virginia for expanding our networks, putting additional investment in and accelerating some of the plans that we have. As it relates to the programs that we talked about today, we heard about today, it's all going towards capital goals, right? Getting something out to each individual location. But what it doesn't address is some of the operational challenges that an ISP has. One of the lifebloods that an ISP relies on is backhaul, right? So we can get a connection to a location, but we need to connect to the internet, get our locations connected to the internet. On the Eastern Shore of Virginia, we have relatively few options to look to providers for middle mile access, backhaul access. One of them is a public entity, right? A public broadband authority that due to its structure and some of the pricing mechanisms, it's prohibitive for us to further invest and use some of the profits that we make to expand our networks and even consider participating in some of these programs at the federal, state level. As a background, we have not expanded outside of the Eastern Shore. We've decided to move outside of the state. We've gone into 7 other states. We provide fiber to the home. We provide wireless technologies through licensed, unlicensed technologies. We provide last mile services. We provide backhaul services. We have hundreds and hundreds of customers that include not only residential and business, but large enterprise as well. The reason why I give you that as background is we would love to bring that energy, our capital, our investors to expand in Virginia. But we have some things that are impeding our progress. And we'd like to see if we can't devise some strategies to work with this council, with the broadband team, perhaps the local community and the authority itself to identify how we might be able to work more cooperatively going forward. Frankly, to the benefit of the citizens on the Eastern Shore of Virginia, right? There's still folks on the Eastern Shore, like this young lady here, who does not have access to the internet. We love nothing more than to provide them service. So I'm presenting today to bring this issue up to see if we might be able to work with this team and come up with some solution.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone else?
There are no others signed up in person. Last opportunity for folks in person. Anyone online? Public comment, please raise your hand in Microsoft Teams. Going once, going twice. No other public comment.
Okay, so now's our time for new business. Is this just open for members discussion or Mayor, do you have something you want to present to us? Okay, well, in line with some of the public comment, that was the next thing at our next meeting. Perhaps we could which I haven't heard discussed in a little while. A follow-up on some of the barriers that we have for deployment. We don't always hear, you know, 'cause we certainly don't expect to, but I mean, some of the challenges that you hear as you go through applications that might be good for us to know and address. We had a bill to pass this year that deals with the railroads. We might want to be talking about that at our next meeting. And other things that are impediments. I think those are always important to keep in front of us. So that we can address, if there's anything, it's not always something that we can do or that we want to get involved in, but if there's place for us to be able to do something, then we should try and do that to assist. Any other members? I'll pass it around. Jimmy, Rich, anybody?
I think I threatened earlier this year, to put together kind of an overview of Make Ready, and I think that's a number one, but certainly for us, that's a number one issue, it's just our challenge. Would be willing to make good on that thread, put together some information at the next meeting, if that's what you'd like.
So you want to do like a presentation for us?
Yeah, just on, not specific to my company, but like, Make Ready, what is it? Why is it so expensive? Why does it take so long? What are we doing as an industry and a partner with coal owners to make it better?
And I would say that probably applies just like economic development and other things we hear about, you know, site preparation for other things. It's the same thing. When it comes to even the commercial side. And making sure that's probably one of the first questions they ask. The BDP would tell us is. One time, you know, do you have activity? So. That sound good to everybody else? Do you trust them, Tamara?
Yes, that's right. Great things over the last 3 months, North Carolina, but I think I probably can go when I retire from state government and work on the utilities.
Anybody on Slack, Christie? Anybody else wanna? Anything that you're dying to hear about? Anybody online that is a member? Nope.
Yeah, this is Steve
Okay.
Sandy. Can you hear me?
Yes, Steve.
Yeah, just, I appreciate your comments and some of those barriers that, identifying those, whether it's, agencies that have to review or part of that make ready process and so forth, I think would be a great topic of discussion. I don't know that it has to be at the next meeting, but at some point, personally, I would like to hear how the LECAP program is going and, again, any modifications maybe that need to be considered to that program as that's being implemented. You know, what are some of the issues maybe that have been run into through that program that it may need some tweaking or some additional, additional discussion. So that's the line extension program that's kind of gotten underway this year.
Yeah, I would like to hear about that too. So that's a good point. We'll talk about that at our next meeting.
Maybe we'll have a budget by the next meeting.
I certainly, so when are we talking now? Sorry.
Well, because there's a July.
Any new month that I have really.
Chandler made it up.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I was gonna let you talk about that really quickly, Chandler, before we dismiss.
Oh, sure. So excited to share that transitioning from the broadband office to the rural center full-time in July-ish.
We've been doing this fight, we've been doing this dance for years between us and Christine with Chandler. I stole him, she's still in the back, so.
Okay, so Christie, you're coming on board, is that what they're saying?
Yeah. I'll be the second full-time staffer on the rural center as their policy and leadership advisor. So I'm working with the Virginia Rural Leadership Institute. We've got our second session coming up in Tappahannock at the end of the month. So it's good.
And Northern Neck.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. The future of the regions, and good to be working with that. Also, I'll be in the broadband space still. We joke that I'll be the proxy on the BAC for the rural center. That's not true. It'll still be Kristen.
Yeah, won't have to hear about McDonald's anymore.
Yeah.
So as we get that rubber bands for our house, and over, get it together, Jimmy.
That's great. Let's talk about Make Ready next time.
But I'll be with you one way or another.
So, if we don't have anything else, so our next meeting, we're gonna set a date, or do we usually for those?
We do poll for those, and so I'll get with you.
You're not really talking July, are you?
No,
Oh.
we gotta go back and look at our.
July has become a very busy month. And there are a couple of conferences that I know legislators go to that are in July, so it might be
August-ish.
mid-August would probably be a good time. I'll tell you, because the campaigning kicks off bigger, I should say, it's already gonna be kicking off, but September gets very busy, so August would seem maybe before the governor does his address to the finance committees, that's generally like August 19th or so. Maybe something before that you could check on.
Okay.
See how that looks for the calendars for everyone.
You can see council rules allow for an all virtual.
And of course, the stuff you have to get ready for that type of meeting too. Great, so we'll check back with members. Is there anything else that anyone needs to bring before we call for adjournment? Okay, with that, I'll take a motion to adjourn.
Second.
All right, all in favor? Let's go. Thanks, we're adjourned.
Aye.
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 Yes, sir. Yes, sir.